A new project, go to the very top and type MVC. This should limit the list. The one you're going to want to choose is the ASP.NET Core Model View Controller. So ASP.NET Core Web App Model View Controller. Be sure to choose the C# one. Otherwise, if your computer's like mine, it might select the F# by default, which we don't want. Hit next. Fill out this information, hit next. .NET 6 is fine, and there's no need for authentication if you're following along with this demo, so click Create. Go ahead and run the application by pressing F5. You're going to see right away that the default website that comes up has two tabs. That means we've got two views and we've got a controller for each one. The Home tab, which is the tab we're on right now, we're going to insert a form right here, right in the middle of this page, that will allow us to select the videos that we want to upload, or the pictures, or whatever type of blob storage you want to upload. Then with the controller, we're going to save that to an Azure Blob image storage. Then we can rename this privacy tab to something like view images or view videos, and we'll repurpose this screen to retrieve the blob images from Azure and display them on the screen here. Let's get started. Take a look at your Solution Explorer on the right hand side. If you don't see it, maybe Get Changes is open. You just have to switch over to Solution Explorer. Go down to Views, Expand Views, Expand Home, and underneath Home you'll see those two pages we were just looking at, Index and Privacy. It's that simple to get into the view and modify it. So let's start with the index. In this view, we're going to create a form. So you can keep the main div here, and maybe you want to change the H1. Instead of saying welcome, we can put our header of upload pictures here. Let's replace this paragraph with our form. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can do this, because this is a CS/HTML file, or Razor file, whatever you want to call it. We can use the old school HTML here, and it's actually going to work just fine. Or we could take advantage of the helpers that come with these Razor files. Let's do the second. Replace that with the @ using, and then we're going to wrap this in brackets, and we've got the HTML, which is the helper. You've probably also seen it with the @HTML. This is the same thing. HTML.begin form, and then we're going to choose the action name, the controller name, the form method. So this is going to be get or post. There are other less common verbs out there, but you can really build everything in a website using get or post. You can update things using post instead of put, and you can delete things using post instead of delete. So sometimes people just stick with that. And then if you look at it, if you look at this comma here, it tells you that everything else needs to be an object to display the HTML attributes. And so we get to do a generic object. We don't have to say what it is. We just put new and there's curly braces here, and put the encoding type. Multi-part form data is for uploading files. The next thing we'll want is our anti-forgery token. So that can be the first line in your form like this. Again, using the HTML helper, anti-forgery token. And to go along with that, we're going to need to put the anti-forgery token attribute on the method. We've already got an index method. Why don't we use a different action? We'll call this save picture. So we need to create that controller. We'll come back to that once we've added the rest of our form. Your anti-forgery token is going to help us with making sure that this site, this form submission, is coming from this website and not from something else. Again, we'll talk more about that. So when we add our next elements, including our image upload, we'd like them to come from a model. So go to your models folder, right click on it, and we're going to do add new item. It's just a simple C# class. And in here, we're going to do properties. So you can type prop, tab, and here we can do string, perhaps something like file details, which is just going to be like the file path. We can do another one, prop, tab, and this one's going to be a little different. It's going to be a little different. Instead of string here, we are going to use iFormFile. That's an interface. If this was in .NET Framework, it would have been HTTP posted file, I believe. This is a little different. So iFormFile. And here, we're just going to call this file. I'm going to save this. We're actually going to rename this though. We don't want it to be just called class. Why don't we call this our image model? And I didn't name the file that, so let's name the file that too, image model. Now we can come back to our view, and here we can include that as the model. So at the very top of the page we can do the @ model with the lowercase m, and then you'll notice I'm putting here the full namespace name plus the class name for image model, not just the class name by itself, that way there's no confusion. Now what this is going to allow you to do is use the editor for. I can do the @HTML.editor for. Almost skipped the HTML there. And then we'll do a lambda. You can pick any letter you want as long as you repeat the letter on the right side. I'm using M. As you can see, the IntelliSense lets me pick file or file details, the two things that we selected. We're going to go with the file details here. Now if I hit F12 in file details to take me back into the model, you're going to want to put an attribute there that it's going to show up in the form for the user to see. This is optional, but I wouldn't skip it, otherwise it's just going to say file details. So we can do display name, and we could say upload upload image. Do control dot on display name, because we need to bring in system.component model. Get rid of these two warnings here by adding a question mark at the end of the type to say that we are going to allow null values. We'll handle those null values in the controller if we need to. This editor for is going to connect this property in the model to the form, and we're going to use the display name to show what's on the screen. So we're going to use this display name, but we're going to populate this control. In order to do that, we should change this to be the label for the same syntax, file details, and we'll make the editor for the file property. That's going to look a little bit side by side, and so we're going to want to put some CSS around this. We could write our own CSS, or we could take advantage of some of the built-in stuff that comes with this project. If you take a look on the far right and you go to layout.cshtml and you look at the top, you can see there's a site.css that gets included here, but you also get access to Bootstrap, and there's this styles file. So this is very helpful. If you want to find them, you can go into the www root, and here is the CSS folder. Here's site.css. So this is where you would put your custom stuff. Now let's go ahead and take advantage of some of that Bootstrap stuff. So I'm going to come back to index, and we're going to add some information around these form elements. So we know from the Bootstrap website that controls in a form can be wrapped in a div with the class form group, right? Let me zoom in a bit for you guys. So I'm going to wrap both of these in one of those divs. There we go. I'll just tab this over a bit. What we have now is with this HTML helper is we can also add additional CSS to just the label and just the editor. So let's do that as well. We put a comma, and then just like how we did up above, we're going to create another generic object. Except this time I'm going to choose class. And we're going to do form control. This CSS is pulling from Bootstrap just like this CSS is. The only difference is we're using the helper here. I'm going to do the exact same thing here. Now, I believe there's also CSS for form label, so maybe we'll make this one form label, and this one form control, and this one form group. We also need a submit button. We get straight from Bootstrap. We don't need to do anything fancy. The classes that they're providing in their input type equals submit or button type equals submit is the BTN, and you could use input or button is why I said that, but is the BTN and the BTN dash primary. The BTN gives it kind of a shape. The BTN dash primary gives it the color. There's green, blue, gray, depending on whether you do primary, secondary, disabled. You can experiment with those. They all come from that CSS that's already included in your project by default. We'll probably want to break these up into different lines. There's different ways you could do that. A div has the default CSS, unless you change it with class here or with style, to break lines up. In other words, to be block, not inline. And so we could use divs to do that. You'll often see people doing that. So we could do, for instance, div and /div. You can also use a line break, which is a BR. So a lot of style choices that you could do here. You also could just add some custom CSS to these to make them not inline, to make them inline block or block. Well, let's take a look at how this looks. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And we can, looks like I'm already running it. I'll just stop it and start it. So we can see the label is on a different line now. And then here's the file control on the middle line. Oops. On the middle line, and then submit. It's on the last line. If I choose a file, I can select a picture, and then if I hit submit, it's going to go to the action designated in the code in the view, but we have not messed with our controller yet, so that won't do a whole lot. Time to create that controller. So if you go to your home controller, we've got our index and our privacy here. So why don't we put it right under the index? I like to have my get to load the page and then my post right after it. So we can do a public action result, and we're going to do, I think we called it save picture. So just copy that to your clipboard. Save picture. And that is going to take in the parameter of our model, image model. Put that in my clipboard. Now there's a few more things we can do here. We have a couple of attributes. First, we're going to have our post attribute, HTTP post. Let it know we will not accept GET requests here. And then the second thing is that thing we talked about earlier with the validation and preventing cross-site scripting. Add in validate anti-forgery token. It does underline this in red, which it very well might. I'm going to hover over mine to show you which class you want to install. I'm using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC.anti-forgery token attribute. So you can choose that one. Okay. So the reason this is underlined in red is because we're not returning anything. When we're finished with what we're doing, we need to return a view. But we want to return the same view that we were already on, unless we want to send back something different. So for now, we can just return the index view. Just like that. Okay, so the next thing is set a breakpoint here if you haven't already, and let's go ahead and run it. There it goes. Choose a file, pick one of your pictures, and then hit submit. It's going to take it to your breakpoint. You can hit F10 if you want, but you don't have to. And we're going to code with it in this position. That way we can see the contents of what's in our image model here. So if I hover over file, I can see that the data is coming in here. Here's our path. The first thing I'm going to want to do with that is we want to get the extension from that. So I'm going to just do, I'll make this lowercase. File extension is going to use the path, and that's just something that comes from Microsoft. .get extension, and then we've got our model.file.file name. Give this kind of a good separation before we begin talking about Azure and just basic file uploads. I am going to show you how to save this file to your local computer just really quickly. Alright, so here is the code. Boom! No, I'll show you. So we're going to go ahead and create a new file stream using stream, another one that comes with Windows. If you hover over these things, it'll tell you what library. This is from system.io, just like a path up here is from system.io. So we're going to open a new file stream that's live for this using block here. And here I use the @ sign so that I don't have to escape it out, but you could take that out and do your double slashes if you like to do it that way. Basically, I'm just providing it a hard-coded path here, and then I'm saying add to that, oops, like this, and I'm saying add to that the file name that we found inside of here, and then we're going to open it. We're requesting the operating system open the file for creation with write access. You could do write, read and write, etc. Let's make it a bit more readable by bringing it down like this, separating our parameters. This is not necessary, just optional. Then once we've got it open, we're going to copy the file to the location in the stream, the contents. Now, if you take a look in here, there's other choices. There's an async copy to, there's a copy just to memory stream without doing it this way. So there's a few choices there. But this is the simplest way to do it with a one statement. Let's go ahead and run it. Choose a file. I'm going to choose something called website screenshot. I'm going to hit submit. Hit F10. F10, if I hover over file extension, it found that it's a JPEG. You might want to compare that against the allowable extensions that you're going to have people upload. You also might want to compare the encoding type. Just make sure that everything is acceptable and you're not getting the wrong kind of files. Hit F10. Okay, we've opened our stream. Hit F10. We've copied the contents to that stream and to the disk. And now return our view, which takes us back here. Now we might want to have a message that shows saying it was successfully saved. There's lots of ways of doing that. One way is to use a view bag. Alright, I'm going to go to my temp folder. As you can see, website screenshot shows up there, 8:47 p.m., which matches my computer time almost, 8:48 p.m. That's the one. Time for Azure. Okay, come back to your project. Now, the best practices way of doing a lot of logic is to take it outside the controller. So we are going to create what's called a service. Right click on your solution and we're going to go add new folder. Let's call it services. And inside this, you might want to add two new folders, one called virtual and one called concrete, or one called abstract and one called concrete. Call mine abstract and concrete. In the abstract, that's where we're going to put our interfaces. So let's do a new class, but we're not really going to create a class. We're just using this to create the file. So let's call this the image service, but I'm going to put an extra I at the front because it's an interface. And I'm going to change it from public class to public interface, image service. And in here, we need a method header, a method stub, if you will. So we don't really even need to know the code to write the method to build the interface. We just need to know what the parameters that it's going to take. We know we're going to pass it the file. If we use this, if we pull the extension out in advance, maybe we'll pass a string for file extension too, but it's not necessary. I think we're going to actually move this code into the service method. So let's go ahead and pass it the iForm file. So we can do, we don't need public or private in an interface, but you do need a return type. For now it can be void. We'll do void, and then next the name of the method, which is going to be upload image to Azure, and then it's going to take in the iForm file, and then you just put a semicolon. Now I don't believe we want to pass in nulls here. We could probably handle that in the controller. So I'll take out the question mark. Now I'm going to add the concrete, and the concrete is going to implement this. So we're going to put IOptions in the clipboard. We'll do add new class, and this is called image service without the extra I in front. And I'll place a colon at the end of the definition, and it's going to implement IOptions. If you do control dot and then click implement service, it creates the method stub for you. Now we can start putting in the goods here. Before we forget, let's come back to the home controller, and let's say let's remove this code here because we're not going to be saving it locally anymore. We're going to be saving to Azure. And let's say if the image model dot file is null, or if the image model dot file name is null, then we're gonna do nothing. We can either return the view. Let's just return the view. This is one of those places where we would set the view bag or something in the image model to say, hey, we didn't like what you sent, let's update the view with an error message. But for right now, let's just get out of here if it's not a valid file. If it is a valid file, it's going to get into this code block here. So here we can do image service dot, and we'll call our method. Now it's not going to be available because it is a service and I have not injected it yet into my controller. So let's jump ahead to that, and then we can come back to calling our method here. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the clipboard. It might already be, but then I'm going to come over to program, and here I have to specify the service to be injected and say which service uses which interface every time we see that request for interface in the controller. Your program.cs, somewhere before you do the builder.build, we would like to add some services. So you can do var services equal to builder.services, and then we can do services dot, and now you have the choice of what type of service we want to add. If we add transient, which is considered the most safe type of service, that means we're adding a service, and every time the service is requested, it will build a new copy of that instance for you. If you do services.add scoped, which is in here, add scoped, that is going to create one in which every time a new request comes in, it creates a new scope for it and creates a new object of it. But for one request, you don't need to create a new instance of it in your controller and in your service and in everything else that requests a copy of it. So that's the next safest. And then lastly, there's the add singleton, which only creates one copy of it ever for the life cycle, and that one you could run into memory issues. We're not doing async in here, but I still think it's always best, unless you have a specific need to use singleton, to use one of the other two, especially the safest one, which is add transient. We're going to use these triangle braces here, and we're going to go ahead and specify the interface and the implementation. First comes the interface, image service, then the implementation, image service. It is a method, so don't forget your regular brackets. And now this is ready to inject. Let's come back to our controller, and let's go to the top. We're going to need a private read-only image service, and we'll call that underscore image service. And in the constructor, in the true fashion of dependency injection, we'll add a comma, image service without the underscore, give the underscore image service, set it equal to the one that came in the parameters. Very good. Now we're ready to use image service interface, and because of program.cs, we know that's going to give us the image service implementation that we want. So after we've verified that the file is not null, we can do image service dot upload image to Azure, and we're going to pass in image model dot file. Let's go ahead and remove this file extension code from here before I forget, and we will put that in our concrete here. Obviously we need to do a lot more than this, and let's not give it an uppercase, let's give it a lowercase file because it's best practices. File name, and let's go to our image service and make the corresponding change there, lowercase f there too. Control Shift S will save all files that you have open. You probably already knew that. Okay, now we can't just connect this to Azure right away. We have to go set up Azure. Now I'm not going to spend a lot of time setting it up because I imagine if you've gotten to this point you probably already researched Azure a little bit, but I'll breeze through it really fast and show you how to create the objects that you're going to connect to and to get that configuration in here. Let's begin that. Log into your Azure account. That's going to be portal.azure.com. Then you're going to go click on create a resource and search for storage account. This little green box up here. If in doubt, look in the small print. First words are use blobs. That's the one you want. Go ahead and click create storage account. Now, the name of your Azure subscription should appear in this drop down here. And basically all this stuff is just going to be filled out with settings that you've got on your account. It sounds pretty generic, but if you haven't created an Azure account, then you won't have any of this stuff, so you have to create your Azure account first. You do need to have a resource group. If there's nothing to pick from the drop down, click create new. Let's give it a name. Data Vids test blob account, ACT. You gotta pick a region. In my experience, as long as you pick one in your country, it should be fast enough. Doesn't really matter what you pick. I've been choosing East. Standard and premium. If you don't need super fast access and super frequent access to your blobs, then standard's going to be fine. It's going to be an upcharge for premium. There's a lot more options you can select with a few screens by clicking on Next Advanced, but they're very specific to what you are going to do with your website and how often people are going to use it, etc. Just like this selection here is. So I would suggest that we just click review and move on with it for the purpose of this demo, because this is going to work for you. So click create. In the top right, it'll show you the status. It usually happens pretty fast. We'll fast forward the video to where Azure has finished this deployment and it's ready for us to use. Great, now click go to resource. Alright, this is our storage account. You can create all types of storage with this to do many different things. Azure is amazing. But this video is very specific to Azure Blob storage, which is a way of storing images and videos and other files in blob containers. So click on containers on the left hand side, and then we're going to click the plus on the container here, and we're going to call this data vids container 1. And on the access level, choose blob, anonymous read access for blobs only. This will make sense a little bit later on. But essentially, we want to be able to serve the blobs from within the container elsewhere on the web page, so we can show pretty pictures and such directly from the HTML without having to use the application to pull out the blobs and then share them, which will help you when you scale an application. That is when you get lots more people using your application. It's a little bit of information here. Blobs within the container can be read by anonymous request, but container data is not available. Anonymous clients cannot enumerate the blobs within the container. And there's some more choices that you could choose. We'll click create. Excellent. Now you can click on that container, and now this is the screen that you could go to see all the uploads that have been sent into this blob. The next thing we got to do is we got to go to properties. This is the information that your application is going to need to start sending data. Well, it's part of the information that it needs. So go ahead and copy this URL to the clipboard. And let's come back to our application and go to your appsettings.json. And let's give it the same name. Let's give it the same name that we had here. So this is the blob URL, okay? So come back to your application and let's add it at the end here. Let's call it blob URL. Oops. Put it in some quotes. And I'm not sure why it did that, so we'll take that off of there. There we go, it's a little bit easier to read. Now in the same fashion, I like to bring in the container, the account, and the resource group. So the resource group's at the top level, let's grab that one. The resource group. Do the account. So the account is this here, data vids test blob account, and the container is going to be, if I click on containers, DataVids container 1. Just like that. Now you might want to have a parent level to this, like just to separate your Azure stuff from the rest of your stuff, but it's not necessary. You are going to need to bring this stuff into C#, and to do that we are going to use options. So I'll show you how to do that. I mean, we might only have one here, but if you do this tutorial and keep going, you have more. So options, and then we'll add here a class. Now let's call this Azure options, I guess. And we're going to basically just create a property for each one of these. Well, let's just put it in Azure here. Azure easier to read, right? Azure options. I'm just put it in here as a comment so we can copy and paste as we go. We'll create the first one. I'll type prop tab string tab and paste resource group, and I'll paste that 2 more times because we're going to do account and container. And all we're going to do is serialize the Azure portion of your appsettings.json into this class and inject it into our service so it's available on demand. Sounds simple, right? It is simple. So let's come on over here to program, and we are going to go to the same area that we did the services. So right here we can do services.configure, and here we're going to put in the name of the class we just built, which is Azure Options. And here we're going to do builder.configuration.get section, and the section we want to get is going to be Azure. Well, that should look familiar to you. Azure from here. Alright, so we've got it here. Now we want to inject. Come back to the services. We'll go to our image service, concrete, and let's create a constructor here. Public image service. And let's create a private read-only Azure Options. Azure Options. Underscore like before. And the injection for this one's going to be slightly different because we're going to do IOptions, not IIS options. Where did that come from? IOptions. And I'm going to do control dot on that using Microsoft.extensions.options. That's the one you'll want. We'll do IOptions of type Azure Options. Azure Options. And the other part that's different from the injection here as to what you would do with a regular transient or scoped service is we're going to do Azure Options equal to Azure Options dot lowercase Azure Options dot value. The dot value, of course, is what's different. Calling a method from in IOptions, which will pull it out of the config and put it into this class for us. Now, if I was to put a breakpoint here, we could test this out. We'll go ahead and run it before we get too deep into this. There we go. Hit submit. And we can run on through here. 11. And what I wanted to do is we can hover over Azure Options and make sure it got popular. And there, as you can see, keys inserts, Vids container 1, Vids test blob account. So you have access to these variables now, and we can continue. Put this into a stream. So we'll do using memory stream, file upload stream, we call it, equals a new memory stream. And this is kind of the newer style of using where we don't need to put it in a block. Code just figures out that when it leaves this, that it can dispose of it for us. We don't need to put the manual block like that. Anyways, so we've got our file upload stream. Now we're going to go ahead and load the file into the stream. To do that, all you need is file.copy_to and then your stream. There's a copy to async if you're in an async method, no problem. Now I like to set the position on any memory stream I'm working, or any stream in general, to 0, just in case we've done something with the stream before I get to that operation. Not necessary right now, but we're going to do it anyway. Just set the position to 0. The blob container client. So, let me show you what's going on here. You're going to use blob container client class, and it's probably not going to show up as green. You're probably going to have to install azure.storage.blobs, the NuGet package. Then you're going to instantiate that with new blob container client. You need an Azure connection string and your container. Now, as you saw, we built our Azure options out earlier. We put the container name. We did not do connection string. So come back into Azure options.c# and you're going to add public string to prop tab connection string. Next, you need to add the connection string to your appsettings.json. I will show you how to do this now. So if you go out to your Azure page and you go to Vids, go down to your containers, and then you're going to see access keys just below that. In here, you'll recognize your storage account just like you added to the appsettings.json already. Now, 2 below that, you'll see connection string. Click show, and then click copy. Now you can come back to your appsettings.json, go to your appsettings.json, your project, add connection string, and then paste it in here inside quotes. If you're not in the United States, it might not say core Windows Net, it might say something else, including the country name. There's different kinds of connection strings, and I'm going to leave a link in the comments in case you're wanting to use this for more than just blob storage. If you want to use it for other things as well, there's a bit more generic ones, and I'll send you a link to how to build those out. Alright, so if you've got your connection string in here, and you've got your connection string in your Azure options, that's going to come in just nicely via your injection here and be available here. Lastly, the container, you've already got that. We're going to need a unique name for this blob. So we'll do var unique name. And if you're not familiar with GUID in C#, there's a really nice GUID class starting with capital G. You can just do, it's a static method that we're going to do is GUID.newGUID. And that will produce an object that we can do toString on, which will give us a nice string unique set of crazy characters. So for now, let's just do that, and we'll add to it the file extension that we got. The file extension does include the dot in front, so you don't have to add the dot separately. Next line, we're going to do a blob client, and again, you need Azure storage.blobs installed, and you're going to need to add usings for Azure Storage Blobs and Azure Storage Blobs models. Okay. Now your blob client, you're going to instantiate a new blob client, and it's going to be the blob container client that you created just a couple lines above, dot get blob client. That method only takes in a unique name, and that's the name that's going to be stored when you save this blob to your Azure account, which is the very next thing that we're going to do. We're going to add a little bit more. So this looks like a lot, but it can be done much shorter. It looks like a lot because I added these headers. Let me explain everything that happens here. So the blob client that you just created one line up, we're going to use the upload method in that, and we're going to pass it in the upload stream, which is that memory stream that you created and loaded the contents into. You can populate a memory stream from a flat file on your hard drive, but we populated it from the upload without saving it to the hard drive first, because we removed that upload code before we said we're going to do Azure. That's not necessary. You're allowed to save it to disk and then upload it to Azure, and then either delete it from disk later or keep a copy too. That's your choice. But anyways, so we've got a memory stream, and then the next parameter is our blob upload options. You're going to understand why we did it this way as soon as I show you the results in Azure. The if you just do control space here, it'll let you see all the options that are available. And I chose just to populate headers for right now. And same thing with the headers. If you do control space inside those curly brackets, you can populate what you want there. It's important to do the content type if you're going to want it to show up in a image src in a HTTP tag. But some of those other choices are important if they're different types of uploads, for example, videos, etc. Okay, the cancellation token, which is the last parameter here, just works like other cancellation tokens. I have a whole video on that. They all work kind of similar in .NET. If you want to take a look at that video, feel free. Okay, so that is the upload code. As soon as it's uploaded, we're going to want to display it in a view. Why don't we go ahead and run this so you can see how this works. Set a breakpoint here. Choose a file, and I've got a heart image here. I'm going to hit submit, and we'll press F10 as we go through the code. There's our GUID there. I'm going to hover over the unique GUID name. As you can see, it's an object, but if I hover over the whole name, then it comes up as our GUID plus the file extension .png. Now we're going to do the upload and setting the content type to image bitmap. Okay, I'm going to pop back into Azure, and let's go to containers, and then the Vids container, and there's our image there. If I click on it, you can see it's here, and I can download it or I can delete it. And if I do delete, then I have the option to also delete the blob snapshots, which basically says I'm going to delete all backups of it, which might have some cost implications for you, save you some money. I'm going to hit cancel, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the URL. Let's come back to our project, and let's go to the view. I'm going to stop it from running. I'm going to go to the view and the privacy. Remember I said I was going to use the privacy tab to display images. All I did here is I changed the default from privacy to images, and I made the header just say images. Got a basic HTML paragraph tag here, and I'm going to do an image tag, which is img, and we'll set the source, which is src, equal to, and I'm going to paste in that URL that I copied from Azure. And we'll make it a self-closing image tag like that. And I'm going to save this, close the full screen, and I'm going to run the application again. So if we click on the privacy tab, it should show images, and there's the image that we uploaded and got the link in there. Now, realistically, I think in your application, if you're doing something similar, you're probably not going to have a hard-coded URL like this. Instead, you're probably going to save this GUID during the upload process to a field in the database, and you would save that GUID as like a file name string in an images table. And then you would dynamically provide this URL, whereas this might be in your settings, or that might be one of the properties in your appsettings.json. You notice we didn't even use all the settings there, because some of those we're going to use if we ever expand on this video and show delete. So now we've seen how to upload a video, upload an image, save it to your disk if you want, but also save it to the Azure Blobs, and then how to display an Azure Blob on your website. There are other ways to pull down Azure Blobs, those that may not involve the user going out to Azure to help you scale. Maybe instead you provide an access token, or provide there's different types of access and security you can put around your blobs, and Azure's got a very powerful tool set for that. If you're interested, I can make a video on that, but I probably need a little direction as to what you really want to see, because there's so many ways that could go. And I can make another video on deleting Azure Blobs if you're interested in that. But I think this covered all the topics that we planned. So I hope this was helpful, and have a wonderful day.